Today, I will be telling you a chilling story. It might be a little bit exaggerated, but you never know the dangers and the things that can be found on the internet. I always lived alone with my father. He was a single father, and since I was a little girl, he always told me stories before bed. Generally, the kind of stories he told, they were life stories that inspired fear on me and made me understand the danger of things. When I was 12, one night he told me a story of a boy. I already knew that it was going to be a horror story. My father began to tell me. This boy's name was Pedro. He played a lot of video games, and like on all platforms, one day he met another boy with the username Smiley. They started playing every day, and little by little they became friends. One day, Smiley told him to meet in the real world. Pedro was a little suspicious because he knew what it could happen if he shared his location with strangers. At this point in the story, I stopped my father and told him, "Yes, I know I must not share any type of private information with users on the network. Change the story, I already know what is going to happen." My father only looked at me and continued with the story. Smiley told Pedro that he wanted to give him a present in real life, for all the good times and for how much Pedro had helped him at the video game. Pedro finally gave in and gave Smiley his address, although after a short time he regretted having done that, but what was done was done. Days passed and Pedro stopped playing with Smiley. He became worried about this situation and began to reflect on what he had done. In the end, he decided to confess everything to his parents that same night when they returned back from work. His parents always came back from work late at night, and when they got home, they went always upstairs with Pedro to his room for saying good night. So that night, Pedro did the same as always. He brushed his teeth, put on his pajamas, and went to sleep waiting for his parents to return so he could confess everything to them. It was the best, Pedro thought. It was a quiet night. He could hear the cars passing by outside and his little sister crying in the next room. At that moment, he could hear how the door of the house was opened and followed by the steps of his parents, who went quietly and slowly upstairs. The door of his room opened, and he could see a little of his father's head peeking through the door. As soon as this happened, Pedro began to tell him how he had done in the school, that he already had finished his homework, and all the other details of his day. He was about to tell him about Smiley, but he stopped when he saw that his father did not answer him, and since it was dark, he could not appreciate his face well. Pedro stopped talking and asked his father if he was okay. The father answered without moving the lips that everything was perfect, although with a strange and spooky voice. Pedro proceeded to ask him nervously where his mother was, and suddenly she stuck her head on through the door from under the father, answering furiously. "Are you going to tell us why you gave the address to Smiley? Do you know why that's not right? Do you know what he did when he came? He killed us both as soon as he opened the door." Following this, Pedro saw how the head swayed and a man entered in his room. The man threw his parents' heads to the ground and said, "Hi Pedro, do you remember me?" Pedro knew it was Smiley. Once Smiley ended with Pedro's life, he heard the sister's baby cry in the next room. He was about to do the same thing to the baby that he had done with Pedro and his parents. But when he got into the room, the baby looked into his eyes and stopped crying and smiled. Smiley took the baby as if he had been doing it all his life and took her away. Decided that he would not kill her and raised the baby as if it was her own daughter. He called her Roxana. The father stopped telling the story to his daughter when he saw that it had been successful. His daughter didn't react, so her father passed his hand over her head and kissed on the forehead and said, "Is it true that you will not give information to strangers, Roxana?"
Something bad is about to happen to me.